The Middle East takes center stage once again. The moment of truth for Iran is inching closer, and the American Armada is forming and ready to act. Trump keeps some members of the International Board of Peace focused on the next stage in Gaza while quietly advancing the real U.S. interests. I'll show you what that is all about. For Israel, the most painful part of the war has come to a conclusion with the return of the body of hostage Ron Gvili, while Netanyahu makes it clear how Israel will address the further parts of the agreement. The people of Israel honor police officer Ron Gvili, who valiantly lost his life on October 7th fighting the Hamas terrorists as the world marked International Holocaust Memorial Day. These are some of the issues I will discuss with you today on my show. Israel's painful October 7th hostage ordeal was brought to a conclusion this week. The body of Officer Ron Gvili, who fought gallantly against hundreds of Hamas terrorists and is documented eliminating dozens of them on that day before running out of ammunition and falling in battle, was discovered in an amazing operation by Israeli forces and medical teams before being brought home to be buried. The first information regarding the location of his body was found by a terrorist, a PFLP terrorist who was captured by the IDF and questioned. And he gave them the indication that his body is among bodies in a cemetery in the Gaza Strip. Israel then moved in there, took over the cemetery, took out several hundred of bodies, numbering them. And after 250 bodies were dug up and checked by the IDF, body number 181 was immediately identified as being wearing Israeli uniform, police officer uniform, but the expert on the teeth immediately saw that it was the teeth that they had for Ron Gvili, and then they had the DNA test made, and at that point it was quite clear that, contrary to what Hamas has been saying, that his body, Israel found his body and brought it back to Israel. The international community at the same time marked the International Holocaust Memorial Day this week, once again showing how much they love to commemorate dead Jews. I admit, I have a problem with how this day has become a sanctimonious parade, an opportunity for many to appropriate the horrors of the Holocaust for their own political causes. The BBC went as far as pointing out that 6 million people were killed in the Holocaust, omitting the fact that they were talking about Jews. It's amazing how much easier it is for the world to commemorate dead Jews than to stand with the living ones here in the state of Israel. I sense that beneath the speeches and the candlelight ceremonies, there are those who resent the fact that they were denied the opportunity of mourning the end of the Zionist project, that we here in Israel deprive them of the pleasure of cleansing their conscience with the hypocritical ceremonies to mourn the failure of the Zionist experiment in the land of Israel on October 7th, 2023. It's a narrative that some are too ready to embrace. While this indeed is part of the reason for the surge in anti-Israel, aka anti-Jewish sentiment that we are witnessing in the world these days, there's a deeper reason for anti-Semitism that is roaring back, and it isn't just because of the hypocrisy of the international community. Jew hatred is rampant because of influential voices who for years found it necessary to single out Israel with condescending moral standards applied to no other country, while at the same time laundering our enemies with false moral equivalences. A perfect example for that is New York Times journalist Thomas Friedman, who draws sick and perverted parallels between democratic states defending its citizens and the murderous Islamic entities sworn to annihilate us. Friedman this week penned an op-ed where he claims to see echoes of Gaza terror in Minneapolis. He argues that three seemingly unrelated crises, ICE operations in Minneapolis, Israeli military actions in Gaza, and Hamas's internal brutality are actually similar. He criticizes U.S. federal agents for copying what he accuses the IDF fire first, ask later mentality. Friedman highlights videos of ICE officers shooting civilians, Israeli strikes in Gaza and what he describes as journalists being killed, and Hamas executing rivals, and treats them as similar and variations of the same phenomena. He claims that in each case, the violence is driven not by security realities, but by political incentives. Trump seeking electoral advantage through law and order, Netanyahu prolonging the Gaza war to avoid criticism for the right-wing flank, an accusation repeated over and over for years by the left wing in Israel, and finally Hamas clinging to power in the post-war landscape. Friedman concludes that Trump, Netanyahu, and Hamas are actually the same and all have similar political motivations for their conduct, and warns that if each succeeds, the U.S., Israel, and Gaza will descend into deeper instability. Are you dreaming of Jerusalem? The Dream Raffle is giving you a chance to win a $1.2 million luxury apartment in Jerusalem, fully furnished and move-in ready. And, this is important, if you purchase your tickets by February 2nd, you'll be entered into our final bonus raffle for a $15,000 cash prize. Click on the link below and get your tickets today. I mentioned this before of how when I first began working with the Prime Minister's office, the members of the team in the Prime Minister's office considered Friedman to be no more than a fool. He never backchecks, never verifies, he's very shallow and lazy. So, even 30 years later, you see that nothing has changed. Thomas Friedman despicably compares ICE officers who are enforcing U.S. law and the idea of fighting genocidal terror organization with the Hamas itself, the group that burned families alive on October 7th. And it fits a pattern critics have been pointing out for years. Friedman's writing on Israel and the Middle East has been consistently wrong, consistently shallow, and consistently detached from reality. All I have to do is mention the Arab Spring, and you already know. Critics across the political spectrum, it doesn't matter if they're left-wing, right-wing, pro-Israel, anti-Israel, they've all pointed out the same pattern. He relies on catchy metaphors instead of facts. He ignores context when it complicates his narrative. He treats Israeli power as inherently suspect and Palestinian actors as inherently innocent. He bends reality to fit a predetermined storyline. And this op-ed is simply the latest installment. Friedman has long been criticized for his habit of collapsing morally distinct actors into the same category. Belen Fernandez, an international journalist who, among others, worked for Al Jazeera and who claims to have read every word he ever published, she wrote a book about it, concluded that his work is built on vacuous metaphors and shallow generalizations, sweeping analogies that sound clever but fall apart under scrutiny. This latest op-ed is a perfect example of that. To compare ICE officers, however flawed their tactics may be, with Hamas thugs is reprehensible. Hamas execute political rivals in the streets. They launch rockets at civilian centers. They burn babies in their cribs in Israel. But Friedman places them side by side as if the only difference is the logo on their uniforms. Friedman presents Hamas-affiliated journalists as innocent civilians, and Israel as a reckless military that fires first and asks questions later. Friedman conveniently omits the well-documented reality that Hamas embeds operatives in media roles, uses press vests as cover, and launches attacks from civilian areas precisely to engineer the kind of tragic outcomes that he cites. He asked whether Israel could distinguish a journalist from a combatant, and he knows the answer. He just chooses to ignore it. The answer is absolutely. The Jerusalem Post once summarized his record as the following: fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 3 times, you're Thomas Friedman. Whatever one thinks of Trump or Netanyahu, they are elected leaders in a democratic system. To place them in the same sentence with Hamas, as if they were parallel actors, that's not journalism. Because when you erase the difference between those who target civilians and those who try to protect civilians, you erode the very moral vocabulary needed to understand this conflict. Just like the media who omit context. Israeli media, for example, this week reported the following: Arabs from a village near the city of Hebron attacked a Jewish shepherd in the evening hours with rocks, injuring him and breaking his phone. The shepherd was evacuated to Soroka Hospital suffering from bruises. In addition, according to the report, dozens of sheep were stolen from his flock. Later in the evening, searches were conducted in the village and the goats were located and recovered. It was also reported that radical left-wing activists infiltrated that very village inside an Arab ambulance in order to create provocations against the Israeli security forces. The far-left activists, for their part, claimed that a pile of hay in the village was set on fire by Jews following the incident. The only thing reported by international news agencies was that Jewish settlers set fire to an Arab village near Hebron. No context, no background. No mentioning of the fact that the news item was reported by local Arab staff who are not held to the same standards or to truthful reporting. But if the New York Times' very own Thomas Friedman fails to do this, and to do a job as one would expect, why do you expect the Arab activists to do anything better? So we need to remember the failures of the media when we look at the events that are taking place here of historical proportions. The United States understands that the murderous Islamic regime in Iran must be removed. Iran has been at the center of instability throughout the Middle East and have also meddled in South America and even moved terrorists into the United States itself. To remove the regime, it's not enough to just strike and move on. What is required is the full effort of U.S. military capabilities, and that takes time. For Trump, it is a major part of showing the world that things have changed, and there is a new world order being put in place for the 21st century. The post-World War II order was built on the idea that global governance should be shared. The Board of Peace signals that the U.S. is now willing to build new institutions in its own image, with its own rules, and with itself at the center. It is a redefinition of leadership, from multilateral steward to architect of parallel structures. Authority will be centralized with the chairman, Trump himself, with the U.S. as gatekeeper, funder, regulator, and final arbiter. This signals a shift from leading through institutions to leading through controlled coalitions. Israeli commentator, attorney Ilana Shushan, commented on this, saying that Gaza was really never the goal. Gaza was the bait, the pretext needed to obtain the UN's blessing for establishing this new peace council. The council is not built like an international institution. It is Trump's private club. Trump cannot be elected to a third term as president of the United States, so he created a mechanism through which he can continue being the world's boss. If not from the White House, then through the Board of Peace. Most of the text of the charter, on which the council is based, deals with the rules of the game that keep power in the hands of Chairman Trump, appointed until he dies or until he chooses to resign. He is the one who appoints the members, and he has the authority to dismiss them. He decides when the council meets, what is discussed, and he can even issue decisions on his own authority. Trump also sent an entry fee for this club, $1 billion for each participating country. In this sense, Trump treats the world like a game of Monopoly. Now, if you don't believe me, go read the articles. Ilana continues, and I loved her conclusion. Trump has managed to project to the world that the United States not only has the strongest military on earth, but also a commander who is not afraid to use that strength. But why use force if you can get everyone to surrender in advance? That, she says, is real power. And while the focus is on the major headlines and the big stories, behind the scenes, real things are determining the future, and they're taking place at the moment. Oren Dori of Globe's economic magazine here in Israel reported this week that Israel and the United States have reached a significant set of understandings to establish a large-scale technology and AI park in southern Israel. This initiative is part of a broader strategic cooperation agreement on artificial intelligence that they just signed in Jerusalem. The Memorandum of Understanding outlines an ambitious plan to allocate roughly 16,000 dunams, that's about 4,000 acres, in Israel for the project, which will be called Fort Foundry 1, and is expected to be built either in the Negev or in the areas enveloping Gaza. Under the agreement, Israel will lease the land to the United States for 99 years. The land remains under Israeli sovereignty, but the park will be managed by American authorities, with most investments coming from the United States. The site will host both American and Israeli tech companies working together on chip manufacturing, advanced computing, and AI development. One of the most striking elements under discussion is the possibility of building a nuclear reactor on Israeli soil to meet the enormous energy demands of the AI data centers. Because Israel is not a signatory to international treaties governing civilian nuclear reactors, but the United States is, the reactor could operate under American regulation and oversight despite being located in Israel. The official document uses more cautious language, referring to high-density energy infrastructure. The agreement also includes a commitment from Israel to dramatically accelerate regulatory processes. All licensing and permitting for the park must be completed within 120 days. Anybody who knows Israel knows this is unbelievable. far faster than the usual pace for projects of this scale in Israel. So if you wonder what Trump's goal is, slowly we're seeing what the realities are. And now to Netanyahu. Netanyahu this week spoke to the nation after the return of our last hostage and revealed a fact that many of us knew about, but was not spoken about publicly. And he says, I quote, "Our soldiers fell because we did not have enough ammunition. That changed when Trump took office." These were the facts of Israel's situation after October 7th, 2023. Biden imposed a partial arms embargo on Israel. He halted the transfer of bulldozers that Israel had already paid for, a move that endangered soldiers and led to Israeli casualties. He forced the IDF to enter Rafah with tanks that did not have full ammunition loads, and that also endangered soldiers and led to casualties. Biden opposed the assassination of Nasrallah, and his Secretary of Defense cursed on the phone our Minister of Defense when Gallant informed him that our aircraft had eliminated the head of the Hezbollah. And when Biden left office, Iran was not at a low point. On the contrary, it felt confident enough to launch 2 barrages of missiles at Israel. The ceasefire, for Biden, it was a goal, not a means to a goal. Netanyahu also sent a message regarding Iran. If Iran makes a mistake and attacks us, we will respond with a force it has never seen. And when asked at this press conference whether the United States would strike Iran, Netanyahu left no room for doubt. He said, and I quote, "President Trump will decide what he decides, and Israel will decide what it decides." And, Netanyahu continues, "We are prepared for every scenario, and if Iran makes a mistake, it will receive a response it cannot even imagine." In other words, there will be a decisive blow against Iran, whether from the United States or from Israel. He made other points. He will not bring in Turkish or Qatari troops into Gaza. He said we will not allow the establishment of a Palestinian state in Gaza. And he stressed Israel will maintain security control from the Jordan River to the sea, and that includes the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu made these remarks in a press conference following the return of the last of the Israelis that were held in Gaza. Many Israeli commentators and analysts, of course, responded to this press conference. Most of them in Israel stated how no one really believed that we would be able to get all our hostages, alive or dead, get them back. 2 of those who I believe best express how many in Israel feel, I want to share with you today. The first one is Alon Kimchi, who laid out a perspective that's worth understanding as we look at where Israel stands today. His argument is striking because it challenges the assumptions many of us had at the start of the war and highlights how dramatically the strategic landscape has shifted in just over 2 years. Kimchi begins by admitting something many analysts felt privately, and this is something I mentioned. He didn't believe Israel could reach a point where every hostage, living or dead, is out of Gaza, while Israel still controls over half of the Gaza Strip, maintains forward operating positions, and keeps most of the Palestinian leadership behind bars. Meaning, if we didn't make to release all of their prisoners in the Israeli prisons. Yet, that is the reality today. We are in half of Gaza Strip. Most of the Palestinians, terrorists, are still in Israeli jails. He identifies 3 key factors that made this unexpected outcome possible. The operational successes against Iran's regional network, which culminated in Kelavi, the strike that broke the sense of encirclement around Israel. Second, Netanyahu's strategic decision to wait for the U.S. elections, betting that Trump would return to office, a gamble that paid off. And third, the strike on Hamas's exiled leadership in Qatar, which he calls the most successful Israeli miss that ever happened, which signaled to Arab states that Israel has shed its restraints. Kimchi acknowledges the valid security criticisms that people have against the government and says that many are justified. But he insists that to understand Israel's current position, you must compare October 6th with January 26, 2026. In that span, he argues, Israel has entered a new Middle East, one in which Israel is no longer deterred by its enemies, but rather the opposite. He stresses that the work is far from over. The war continues at varying intensities, and the underlying problems still remain. But since October 8th, 2023, the enemy is seeing a different Israel, an Israel which is offensive, initiative-driven, stubborn, unpredictable, and unafraid. According to Kimchi, this government and this security establishment have created a new reality across every arena where the IDF has operated. A string of tactical successes emerging from a historic low point, paid for with the blood of thousands of Israelis. He concludes by urging people to focus less on slogans like total victory and more on the actual policy. In his view, the government's offensive doctrine has proven itself, even with all the pain and all the loss. No one, especially the government's critics, imagined that 2 years later, the IDF would still be operating in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza, with 0 hostages left in the hands of Hamas in Gaza. Israel, he says, is waking up to a new era, one where the enemy's leadership is mostly new, because we took out the old ones, nervous, and trigger-happy. And how long this new balance lasts depends entirely on Israel's choices. Another perspective that has been circulating in the Israel strategic community is from analyst Yuval Bloomberg. His take focuses on leadership, endurance, and the political pressures surrounding the hostage issue. Whether one agrees with him or not, it's important to understand the argument because it reflects a significant current in Israeli public discourse. Bloomberg opens with a sweeping claim that Prime Minister Netanyahu's leadership will be recorded in Israel's and the Jewish people's historical chronicles, primarily because of the return of all the hostages, living and dead, including those that were taken even before the war. He attributes this achievement entirely to Netanyahu's persistence, his stamina, and his leadership. He admits personally that he never believed this mission was possible. Again, we all believe that. He assumed Netanyahu placed it at the top of his commitments as a moral statement to the Israeli public, but not as a realistic objective. In Bloomberg's view, Hamas was expected to drag out the hostage saga for years, especially given the political dividends it was gained from internal Israeli polarization, the protests, the demoralization, and the social fragmentation. What makes the return of all the hostages an historic achievement, he argues, is that it happened in complete contradiction to the deal Hamas had been pushing for until the moment Trump entered office. Hamas's conditions demanded total Israeli capitulation, a withdrawal from Gaza to the last centimeter, leaving Hamas in power and returning to the eve of October 6th, but with a narrative of Hamas victory. Throughout the war, Bloomberg says, irresponsible voices, opposition leaders, retired security officials, the Kaplan protest movement, and what he calls the defeatist media, turned the hostages into a political instrument and their families into circus performers, pushing Israel towards a surrender deal that, in his view, would have guaranteed the next October 7th. Despite enormous pressure from inside and outside Israel, Bloomberg argues that Netanyahu never broke. His compass remained fixed on the goal he set on October 7th. Bloomberg insists he cannot imagine any other political leader, certainly not from what he calls the weak opposition in Israel, who would have withstood such pressure while remaining loyal to a moral, political, and strategic compass, and navigating towards the goal with intelligence, wisdom, and determination. Both analysts, from different angles, are describing a moment in which Israel has reasserted deterrence, rewritten expectations, and entered a new era whose durability now depends on the choices made from here forward. So, with all that said, what can we expect now? Who knows? Time will tell. And though we are in the land of Israel, I'm not a prophet. I can only explain the writing on the wall. I'm not the prophet, Daniel. I'm Daniel Seaman. So join me again next week on Straight Up, here from the JNS TV studios in Jerusalem, Israel.